where we left off. The last time we were together, we talked about probably something you didn't anticipate, which was corn. And we talked a lot about corn, maize for the rest of the world. Really only here in the English-speaking world do we refer to corn as corn. It's maize everywhere else. But at any rate, what we saw was, and what we were working toward, was a fundamental inequality in North and South America when compared to the rest of the world. There was no definitive marking or sculpture or document that said, here's where this inequality comes from. But as historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists, we have to be creative here. Creativity is the greatest tool in an academic's tool belt. And we had to ask ourselves, not what was different about the people of North and South America, because we know there was not a difference. But we had to ask ourselves, what were they missing? Right? What didn't they have that the rest of the world had? We saw one failure after another here in the New World of people trying to abandon the Paleolithic life, the hunting-gathering lifestyle, and settle in a permanent way. Right? We saw Poverty Point, 1500 BCE, fail. We saw the Adena peoples and the mound builders fail. We saw the Hopewell culture fail. And on again. Right? We saw that by the time the Hopewell culture will fail, ancient Rome is in full swing. There's indoor plumbing in the city of Rome itself. The pyramids, by that point, are 3,000 years old. Civilization is booming around the world. But here in North and South America, it's not. And then we saw corn arrive. And to be fair, we saw corn invented by these people that were clearly inferior, which of course they weren't. And we saw them take control of nature, genetically modify an organism. I know that's a scary word these days. And take control of their lives. And look what follows. The Olmec, the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, right? From what? From farming. Leaving the Paleolithic behind and entering the Neolithic age. And we saw everywhere that corn went in the New World, civilization followed. Begins in Mexico, we know that. And then it moves into the American Southwest, a desert climate, similar climate to around Mexico City today where corn was initially invented. And we saw the great corn cultures emerge, the Anasazi, right? The Hohokam peoples. They emerged as a result of that one addition, just being grain. That's all. Pretty spectacular. What I want you to understand now is that corn is going to move very slowly through the New World, to the point where, as you can see the dates here, we really won't see cornfields prevalent in America until almost 5,000 years after corn is quote unquote invented, modified in Mexico. We know that corn begins in Mexico about 5,000 BCE, 7,000 years before present. But we won't see corn reach a place like, for example, Missouri, right, the Mississippi River Valley, until 700 CE. 700 CE, literally almost 6,000 years after corn's initially invented. We won't see it reach Wisconsin by 900 CE. Canada as well. What's going on in 700 CE in the rest of the world? Well, they've been civilized for so long, history's had a pretty long sweep. In the year 700 CE, we're seeing the rise of Islam in the Middle East. Okay? In the year 900 CE, we're seeing the really full swing of medieval Europe, knights and kings and queens. Incidentally, they didn't have indoor plumbing. The Romans had that. It's been so long since Rome fell, these people lost that technology. So we've gotten to the point where we're having civilization and losing it and rediscovering it in many ways. And people here in the New World are still just trying to get started. So why did that take so long? I mean, my gosh, we know that pigs and sheep and goats and cattle were native to the Middle East, and But they spread all over Europe and Asia really fast. Why did corn take 5,000 years just to move a few hundred miles north? Well, again, we could say it had something to do with the people. Maybe they just weren't intelligent enough. Maybe they were savages. Right? What a loaded and horrific term for anyone to use. Savages. And the terrible thing is, in the academic world, really up until about 30 or 40 years ago, we used that term as well. It's unbelievable how far we've come in such a short time. But we know these people were not savages. Okay? We know they were just as smart, or in some cases smarter, than anyone else in the world. We had evidence of it, right? The Mayans devised a mathematically perfect calendar. The Mayans invented the number 0, something the Romans never did. And that changes mathematics in a fundamental way, by the way, when you have a 0 as a figure to work with. But when we look at this, again, what were they lacking? I would go back to what I talked to you about earlier. Maybe it was nothing more than the blessings and curses of geography. Why did plants, animals, seeds, and materials spread so quickly through Europe and Asia and so slowly through North and South America? Could it be something as simple as where you live? The shape of the continents. I want you to visualize Europe and Asia, right? They're very narrow north to south, very wide east to west. Narrow north to south, wide east to west. There's a couple advantages to your continents being shaped that way. Number one is that if a region is on the same line of latitude as another, they automatically have the same length of day and relatively similar climates. So that means if cows, goats, sheep, and pigs, if wheat, oats, and barley could live in the Middle East, they could probably, with minimal adjustment, live anywhere on that same line of latitude, from China all the way to Spain. Again, Europe and Asia are short north to south, long east to west. Information transfers easier. People transfer easier. Plants and animals, flora and fauna transfer easier. Chickens and ducks begin in Asia, but Europeans will have them after a very short time, right? Because they're moving east to west. Similar length of day and similar climate. I want you to visualize that your Asian continent, narrow north to south, wide east to west. And I want you to think about North and South America. It's the exact opposite, right? It's like that little tool on Photoshop, right? It's like you took it and you turned it. North and South America are skinny east to west and very tall north to south. So what that means is, as you move, starting at the equator, Ecuador, right? Starting at the equator, and you start moving north or moving south, you're going through radical different changes in climate, length of day, and lines of latitude every time. I mean, think about how different Pennsylvania is from Texas, or Texas from Guatemala. Right? As you move north to south, the length of day changes, the climate changes. Plants and animals don't adjust that way. Okay, cacti are not going to live in Canada. You're not going to see a big Canadian moose or a polar bear living in Mexico. Radically different climate. So here in North and South America, again, people are just cursed by geography in a way. They're behind the 8 ball again. Because the shape of the continent, something as simple as that, means information and material just doesn't travel as fast. So every time corn reaches a new region, like say Missouri, Ohio, Ontario, wherever, every time those people get corn finally in their hands, they kind of have to start the trial and error process of how to grow it over again. Because you know how to grow corn in Mexico, but that is not going to work if you're trying to grow it in Nebraska or North Dakota. So they're constantly discovering and rediscovering corn, whereas anywhere else in the world, they could have just planted it and grew it. So again, I don't want to be too deterministic. I don't want to, take the human element out of it, but geography can be a blessing for many people. But for the people of North and South America, geography was a curse. But regardless, by the time we get to the year 900 CE, we are going to see corn in most of the fields in America. We're going to see people growing it. We're going to see people saving it. And we know what that allows them to do. It allows them to abandon hunting and gathering, the Paleolithic lifestyle, and start doing other things like having jobs, building schools, building cities, economies, right? Shopping centers and religious temples, all from that one addition of a long-lasting, storable cereal grain. Are there any questions on that? Okay, so here in America, people have the corn. What do? When they leave hunting and gathering, what do they create? Well, you're looking at it. What you're seeing here on the screen, about the year 1000, so about 1,000 years ago from present, is the pinnacle of North American civilization before European arrival. We don't know who these people were. We don't know what they called themselves. We call them the Mississippians. You can probably guess where they lived. On the Mississippi River. And this is their great city, but not their only city, but certainly their great metropolis. This is Cahokia. Cahokia was everything you want a civilization to be. It was a major urban center. It covered over 6 square miles. At the time, listen closely, at the time, this city was larger in size with a greater population than London, England at the same time. Cahokia. Larger in size, greater population, a bigger city by any definition than London, England at the same time. They definitely were behind, but look who caught up. Now, Cahokia is located on the Mississippi River. Today, this is right near St. Louis, Missouri. It might technically be in Illinois, I believe, but they're real close. If you're in St. Louis Metro, you can reach it. But you can see what they made here. And we can learn a lot about them. And you will be, by this point, not surprised to notice that this kind of city looks very similar to the great cities of Mesoamerica, the Aztec cities, the Mayan cities. These don't look like European cities. These look uniquely American, because they were. These people were part of a vast trade network that traded information and materials with people in Mesoamerica all the time. These people dealt with Mesoamerican peoples in trade through trade networks regularly. Again, they were civilized. Dare we use that word? They certainly were not savages. Now, there's a couple things we can look at when we look at Cahokia. By the way, you see on the image here, this is Cahokia today. There's this nice little interstate that runs right through it. Yikes. All right, it's not an easy go for these people. But the primary temple is preserved as a state heritage site. You can take stairs and climb all the way to the top. Now, it doesn't look like it once looked. You can see that right here. But it's still very impressive and undeniably made by the hand of man. They made this structure, I want you to think about this, without horses, oxen. This was all manpower. They took baskets of dirt, about the size of a laundry basket. They'd carry it, they'd turn it over, they'd dump it, then they'd go get another one. And they did that over and over and over again until they made this enormous structure. Again, you can see a car right there, how big this is. These aren't hunters and gatherers experimenting, okay? These are civilized people with a stratigraphy, with a hierarchy, with laborers and designers. This is a modern civilization. Here you can see an artist's rendition of Cahokia in its own time. And you can see it has everything that you would expect on top of these temples. Thatched grass roofs, fences, ceremonial ball courts, almost identical to the ones you would see in Mexico and Central America. These ball games were not just about entertainment. It wasn't just about exercise, competition. These were usually done ritualistically, ceremonially. Sometimes the losers would be sacrificed and killed. In fact, most times. But you can see it's a sprawling settlement. Here's a closer look on the ground. Average life in Cahokia. Again, these aren't hunters and gatherers. And this city, right around the year 1000, is in some way, shape, or form going to exist for 500 years. Now think about how long the United States has been around. We're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. We're in it, as a matter of fact. 250 years. The Cahokians, the Mississippians, 500 years. So don't sneeze at them, because they've been around longer than we have. Yet I would be probably not out of hand to say most of you had never heard of these people before, and definitely not most Americans. So what can we say about the Cahokians? Well, we don't have their writings. We do have some of their material culture. What did they leave behind that can tell us about themselves? Well, here's what we know. This city, at least the central part of it, is surrounded by a wall. Okay? Keep that in mind as we jump ahead here. That wall is made of 20,000 tree trunks. It's 3 miles around. There are watchtowers in an organized, separate amount of feet. I'm not sure exactly what that is, right? But it's there. It's a defensive wall. Okay? So when you see a defensive wall around a central region of a city, by the way, very on brand for civilized people, what can we probably infer from that? Yeah. That's it, yes. They had enemies, right? They got to have enemies. Because why else would you build a wall? Okay, so we're going to look for maybe an army. They have enemies. They need a wall, but they also need an army. But there's no evidence of an army at Cahokia. You know, when you want to look for remains, archaeological evidence of an army, you're going to look for a lot of the same things over and over again in the ground. You know, if you would join the military today, they wouldn't say, pick whatever uniform you want, wear whatever boots you want. Go, you know, they're going to give you your boots. They're going to give you your uniform. They want all of you to look the same, to be outfitted and equipped the same. And, you know, if you have 10,000 people all wearing the same things and using the same things and dropping the same things, you're going to know you probably found like an army barracks. There's no evidence of an army at Cahokia, but they have this darn wall. So the question becomes, what's it for? They had enemies. A wall would not be enough. You need an army, but there is none. So we're going to look a little closer. And we see, you know, this is not a great wall because most of the civilization, most of the city's residents are outside of the darn wall. So what good is that? Who are you protecting? Well, when you look at who's inside the wall, you're going to see the homes are bigger. We're going to find lots of animal bones inside the wall, meaning that people eat more meat. Anytime you find animal bones, more meat, that means more money. Rich people. And we see the people on the outside have smaller homes, really corn-based diets. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, that wall is designed to keep out an enemy. Who is that wall keeping out? It's keeping out, yeah, good. The poor, yeah, it's keeping out the poor people, the peasants. And man, then nothing says you have arrived as a society like rich people keeping out the poor people, right? But that's what this is. The people inside those walls had all the religious temples, all of the biggest homes, all of the best diets, all of the money and material wealth. This was a wall designed for the rich to keep out the poor. And you see that all over Europe and all over Asia and all over Africa. It's just one of the hallmarks of civilization. So it's an interesting point. I appreciate these answers. What you also don't see at Cahokia are lots of weapons. You don't see really weapons at all. And that's another question. Well, where are the weapons? Well, remember, they're not a soldierly people. They're not a martial culture. They don't have an army. And what we find is they're really not fighting each other at all. We don't see weapons anywhere. So what we can infer is the stuff they do leave behind are neat little artifacts, religious, symbolic items. We'll say Cahokia is a cultural center. It's a place of priests and artists, not warriors. Fighting, being the toughest, has no value in this culture. And remember, there's little tiny cities all around Cahokia, just like, you know, if you go to New York City, if you go to Philadelphia, if you go to Chicago or Pittsburgh, right? There's a big city, but there's tiny cities all around it that kind of feed off of it. And that's happening here too. There's cities all around Cahokia. So Cahokia is really the center of this Mississippian culture, but not a violent peoples, not at all. This is an image you're definitely going to recognize, but you know it's not here in the United States. This is Stonehenge in the United Kingdom. As archaeological investigations have been underway at Stonehenge, they find that this complex is actually much bigger than what they expected. And one of the things they found was this. Nearby, what they'll call Woodhenge. Okay? So whatever Stonehenge was designed to do, it certainly aligns with astronomical elements in the sky, changing of seasons, movements of the stars. There was a similar one nearby in England, right? A Woodhenge. That depending where you stood and where the sun was would make shadows on the ground that would align with different celestial events. Now, of course, we say, well, those weren't advanced people. They weren't savages. They paid attention to the skies. They paid attention to the stars. They were Europeans. They were on the road to civilization. Now, again, this is several thousand years before Cahokia, but it's a whole different timeline in the New World. Europe and Asia and America never came to pass. Different societies altogether. As close as you can get to being on different planets, basically, were the people of North and South America to the people of Europe and Asia. But then subsequent archaeological investigations at Cahokia turned this up. And wouldn't you know it, on the other side of the world, separated by thousands of miles, and I think most importantly, thousands of years, the Mississippians, the Cahokians, had their own Woodhenge. And it did more or less exactly what the European equivalent did. So again, it's almost criminal that academics for centuries looked at the fundamental inequality of the Americans, North and South, and the rest of the world in the Paleolithic world, and came to the conclusion that, well, you know, people in the Americas were just inferior. They just weren't as smart. When they're doing almost exactly the same things, just at different times. The difference was those Europeans, those Asians, those Africans had long-lasting cereal grains like wheat, oats, and barley, and rice just available to them. And here in America, they had to invent one. But wouldn't you know, as soon as they got it, they're doing the same things. So again, that term, savages, it's fundamentally flawed, and this is just the beginning. Here's the issue we face. By the year 1350, 350 years after Cahokia really emerges as a major urban center, what's going on in Europe in 1350? The Black Death, the 100 Years' War between England and France. Okay? By 1350, we start to see the population of Cahokia drop precipitously. Less people living there, less buildings being created. And by 1500, the city and all the tiny cities around it are going to be completely abandoned. The people who live in those cities decided, like we've seen so many times, that staying here, living in this city, is not the best way to feed my family. The best way, after 500 years, is hunting and gathering. You imagine what kind of calamity, what kind of catastrophe would bring down a 500-year-old civilization, where hunting and gathering is a better alternative than regular life. Well, it gets to another myth. And it's the myth that native peoples here in North and South America were somehow conservationists. They did have a special connection to the natural world, but so did most people. Here in North and South America, you know, the people that lived here were just as human as us today. They were greedy. They were selfish. They wanted more. More what? More money, more power. Well, in these cultures, what is money and power? It's corn, right? Whoever controls the resources controls the wealth and power. So what's going to happen? Well, in Cahokia, for example, they plant corn in the same fields year after year after year. Now, these people knew that. We know it today. If you plant a crop in the same field year after year and never give it a break, never give it a rest, you're going to drain that field of nutrients. You're going to drain that field of vitamins and minerals that give you big, abundant crops. So every year they would plant more corn, and they'd never give it a rest. And each year the corn got smaller and smaller, and the fields produced less and less. And all they had to do was plant somewhere else. Let that field recharge a little bit. But they couldn't, because corn was money and power. So they planted the same fields over and over again. Before long, what do? They killed their own way of life because they ruined their fields. In the American Southwest, the great corn cultures we saw, right? Last time we were together. They needed to irrigate with fresh water for corn to grow there. It is the desert, so they did. But they thought, what if we could get more water, right, than the feeble rivers and creeks we have? They said, what if we used ocean water? That would give us an unlimited supply of water. That's true, but that was salt water. And you would poison your fields if you did that. And they knew it. But they did it too. They irrigated with salt water. And their fields became toxic and corn wouldn't grow. So in both instances, what's going to bring down the great corn cultures of America is greed, selfishness. We want to blame them for that, but that's a very human thing. We're all guilty of that. We all want more, right? But you have to know there's a balance. And these people destroyed their own way of life. So, where do the people go? Well, when they abandon Cahokia, right, where are they going to leave? They have to take to their own. They have to take to the wilderness, but they've never lived there. It's been 500 years since they were hunters and gatherers in any real pure sense. And there's not a lot of resources out there. Remember, Cahokia, the Mississippians, were a culture of artists and priests, not warriors, not fighters. But they do what we see in, post-apocalyptic movies today, right? The Walking Dead, The Last of Us. Think about what they do. People abandon cities. They don't go off on their own. They clan up into groups, right? Because there's not a lot of resources. There's not a lot of food. There's not a lot of water. And if you're going to get it, you're going to have to fight for it. So in The Walking Dead, people are driving around in RVs, and in The Last of Us, they have these kind of souped up vehicles, designed for war. It's every man for himself, but not really. It's every clan for themselves. You might get 20 or 30 people together, and that's your new clan. And you've got to learn to fight, because you will die if you don't. There's not a lot of food out there. There's not a lot of medicine or resources out there. And that becomes a way of life here in the New World. The artists and priests who lived in Cahokia, the peaceful people, abandon that lifestyle. They clan up, and they start fighting each other. Warfare is everywhere. Warfare is life and death. So the cultural society now becomes a military society. The most powerful people in any clan group are the most powerful warriors. Because that's life or death. And that's right around the year 1500. So by the year 1500, all of the major cities of the New World are either collapsed or gone. And these clan-based fighting groups are all that you see. These martial societies. Dare I use the word? Tribes. Now, I want you to think about what's about to happen. That great turning point in world history, 1492. We all know what happens in 1492, right? Columbus sails the ocean blue. And when he gets here, and he and his European friends, metaphorically Columbus, they're going to see these tribal, warlike peoples. They're not going to see Cahokia and its 500 years of excellence and civilization. They see the tribal, warlike peoples. So Europeans look at these native peoples and they say, what are we looking at here? Okay, it's like these people never civilized. It's like these people never left the hunting-gathering way of life. Europeans will say it's like these people never got started. It's like who we would be if we didn't live in cities. Like we're back in time. So Europeans will say these people aren't equals to us. These people are what? Savages. And that myth, that fundamental misunderstanding, is going to color the next 600 years of history. Because remember, Columbus wasn't seeing the beginnings of civilization when he came to the New World, these tribal peoples. He wasn't seeing the beginning of anything. He was seeing the end of civilization. He was seeing the aftermath of civilization. He was not seeing what civilization looks like before it starts. He was seeing what civilization looks like after it collapses. But he didn't know that. None of these Europeans knew that. So they said these people were savages. And in their minds, it gave them free rein to lie to them, to enslave them, to brutalize them, to murder them. Within 100 years of Columbus's arrival, upwards of 90 to 95% of all of North America's and South America's native peoples will be dead. And Europeans said, well, that's too bad. They were all just savages anyway. It's a fundamental myth. It's a fundamental misconception of what came before Columbus, what we just talked about today and before, that changes in colors the 600 years that precedes this moment to this very day. To this very day. So you see why I wasn't going to start this class in 1492 like when I took it.